Hello and welcome to today's session on valuation of mergers and acquisitions. I'm Dr. Maruf Ahmed Mir, PhD in Financial Markets and MBA in Finance and Accounts from AMU Aligarh. And at present, I am associated with Asian Business School, Noida as Associate Professor in the area of Finance and Accounts. So dear students, let's start with valuation of mergers and acquisitions. Students, the Companies Act 1956 does not insist on a valuation report. However, there are situations where SEBI guidelines call for a professional valuation by a merchant banker or valuation agency. So, in this case of structured products, SEBI insists on valuation by a SEBI approved credit rating agency. Reserve Bank of India insists on fair valuation by a category 1 merchant banker or a chartered accountant as per the discounted cash flow method, which is called a DCF. For the foreign direct investment, that is FDI, in unlisted companies, even when it is not required by law, appointment of a valuer is a standard market practice for most transactions that are in the nature of merger, demerger or acquisition. Now, let us discuss the valuation methods. Before a valuation, there has to be a clarity on what is being valued vis-a-vis business or the shares. For example, if company A proposes to acquire business of company B for cash, then it needs a valuation of the business proposed to be acquired. Valuation of company B or its shares is not relevant in this case. However, if company A proposes to acquire company B through a stock swap, then the value of the shares of the company B based on the valuation of its business becomes a factor. Various methods which are available for valuation. Broadly, the valuation methods can be grouped as follows. The first one is market based methods, which is capitalized earning value divided by price earning multiplier. The valuation here is based on the following relationship, that is EPS multiplied by PE ratio, which is the price of per share. Earning per share, that is the EPS, is projected for the company being valued. So, in case of unlisted companies, price to earning ratio, which is commonly called PE ratio, of the peer group is considered. Peer group would be other listed companies from the same sector of a similar size. Where more than one such company exists in the peer group, then a weighted average is used. Suitable adjustments are made to the ratio to reflect specific areas where the company is different from the peer group. So, if a company's EPS, that is earning per share, is projected to be rupees 6 and the peer group PE ratio is 12 times, then the shares of the company will be valued at rupees 6 into the 12, which is 72 per share. So, if the company has issued 10 crore shares, then the valuation of the company would be the 72 just calculated multiplied by 10 crore, which is 720 crore rupees will be the value of the company. So, EBITDA, that is earning before interest, tax and elevation, multiplied earnings are affected by factors such as financing mix of debt and equity. Another factor is accounting policies regarding depreciation and amortization. Another factor is tax planning. So these factors are not so closely linked to the actual operations of the company. An alternate approach to valuation uses earning before interest, depreciation, tax and amortization, which is EBITDA. It is based on the following relationship: EBITDA multiplied by EBITDA multiple, which is valuation. EBITDA is a projected for the company being valued. As with PE ratio, so EBITDA multiple for the peer group can be used when the company is not listed. If the company's EBITDA is projected at rupees 50 crore and the peer group EBITDA multiplier is 20 times, then the company will be valued at 50 crore into 20, which is 1000 crore. Another aspect is enterprise value. This is calculated as the market value of equity and debt of the company less cash divided by the bank and the value of the investment in the company's portfolio. If a company's share are valued at rupees 50 per share and it has issued 10 crore shares, then the market value of the company shares, also referred to as the market capitalization, would be 50 into the 10 crore, that is 500 crore rupees. Now suppose the market value of the debt that the company has taken is rupees 10 crore and the company has an investment portfolio worth rupees 5 crore. So the company also has rupees 2 crore in the form of bank cash. So enterprise value can be calculated now as 500 crore calculated earlier plus 10 crore minus 5 crore minus 2 crore, that is 503 crore. Another way of doing it is price to book value. The valuation is based on the following relationship: book value per share multiplied by price to book value ratio, which is price per share. The book value per share of the company is considered. Price to book value ratio of the peer group is used for unlisted companies. So if the book value per share of the company is 22 and the price to book value ratio of the peer group is 1.5, then each share of the company is valued at 22 into this ratio, which is 1.5, and it comes rupees 33. Another way of doing is sales multiple. Now this method links valuation to the sales turnover of the company. The relationship used is as follows: sales turnover will be multiplied by sales multiple, which will give you the valuation. We will take an example. Suppose a sales turnover of a company is rupees 150 crore. The peer group sales turnover is rupees 600 crore and peer group market capitalization is rupees 1800 crores. The peer group sales multiplier is thus in this case 1800 crores divided by 600 crores, which is 3 times. Accordingly, the company will be valued at rupees 150 crore multiplied by the 3, which is the multiplier. So total value of the company will be 450 crore rupees. So discounted cash flow based methods are also used. The market based models are based on earning per share, sales multiplier, etc. at a point of time. Now discounted cash flow method uses the projected cash flows of the company over the period of time in future. By discounting those cash flows to the present value, due weightage is given to the timing of those cash flows. So annual cash flows are taken for an initial period, let's say 3 years, at the end of which the cash flows are expected to have a stable growth rate. The discounted value based on cash flows in the initial period is called as initial value. The discounted value based on cash flows in the stable growth period is called as terminal value. It is calculated by dividing the year 4 cash flow by discount rate minus the stable growth rate. The total valuation of the company is equal to initial value plus the terminal value. Acquirers are cautious about paying too much terminal value since it relates to period further into the future. This is particularly in the case of industries where technology or the buyer behavior changes rapidly. There are 2 facets to free cash flows. One, free cash flow to firm. Free cash flow to the firm, which is called FCFF, is the operational cash flow that is available for a servicing debt and equity investor. It is calculated as follows. So FCFF will be equal to PAT, profit after tax, plus depreciation and amortization, plus the interest, which will be 1 minus tax rate, minus the normal working capital investment. Another aspect is normal fixed capital investment. The project free cash flow to firm for each year is discounted at a weighted average cost of capital, which is commonly referred to as WACC. Now, the second method of free cash flow is free cash flow to equity. From the free cash flow to the firm, if the payment towards the debt servicing are reduced, the balance belongs to the equity investors. This is called free cash flow to equity, FCFE. This has to be discounted at the cost of equity to arrive at a value of the firm. So, how do we calculate it? FCFE is FCFF calculated earlier minus interest into 1 minus tax rate minus the loan repayments. Another methods are called as asset based methods. So, under this method, the balance sheet values are restated to their current realizable value. In the case of mines, the present value of the estimated mineral resources lying below the ground would be used. The true net worth of the company is assessed as the value of the assets minus the value of the liability, excluding the share capital and reserves. Now, there is a choice of appropriate method in which is an art. Irrespective of the method adopted, the valuation need to be adjusted to reflect the realities of the situation. Now, some of these adjustments we will discuss. Number one is unutilized assets. If a company has surplus land, then the market value of that surplus land is added to the valuation. Similarly, if company owns land whose value is significantly above the value reflected in the books, then the differential value is added to the valuation. Now, if the acquirer is not interested in such land, then they may be demerged into a separate company, which the acquirer does not acquire. Now, investments. An acquirer taking over a business may not be interested in the treasury investments that are held in the company. In such case, the valuation is arrived at after excluding the post-tax income arising from the treasury investments. Another is build, operate and transfer project, which is called BOT. Some infrastructure projects are awarded on the basis that they partly build on assets, then operate it for a specific period, say 30 years, and then transfer back to the government. The transfer value is fixed upfront. In such cases, the terminal value is calculated based on the value fixed in the agreement, rather than the value calculated based on the free cash flows, which is be it FCFE or FCFF. Now, another aspect is control premium. An acquirer may be prepared to pay more if the acquisition will lead to obtaining control over the company. This is a control premium. Earlier transactions were structured in the form where the control premium or other payments would be paid to the promoters as a non-compete fee or under some other name. The company's shareholders did not get the benefit of such payments. As we have discussed, SEBI has now mandated that even such valuation needs to be paid to the company or its shareholders. Valuation reports tend to provide the value based on more than one method, so that the acquirer has a range of values. The final value at which the transactions are concluded would also depend on the negotiation strength of the prospective parties. Now, accounting for the amalgamation. This standard issued by the Council of ICAI, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, came into effect in respect of accounting period commencing on or after 1st of April 1995. It is mandatory in nature. It deals with the accounting for amalgamations and the treatment of any resultant goodwill or reserve. Share acquisitions are not covered by this standard. As we have earlier discussed, in an amalgamation, one or more companies cease to exist. In a share acquisition, the acquired company is not dissolved. It continues to be existent. Only the shareholding control of the acquired company changes hand. Let's discuss few of the definitions. Amalgamation means an amalgamation pursuant to the provisions of the Companies Act 1956 or any other statute which may be applicable to the companies. Another term is transfer or the company. It means the company which is amalgamated into another company. Now, another term is transferee company. It means the company into which transfer or company is amalgamated. Reserve means the portion of earning or receipts or other surplus of an enterprise, whether capital or revenue, appropriated by the management for the general or for specific purpose other than the provisions which are for depreciation or diminution in the value of the assets or for a known liability. Students, amalgamation in the nature of merger is an amalgamation which satisfies all the conditions which we will discuss now. Number one, all the assets and liabilities of the transferor company become after amalgamation, the assets and the liabilities of the transfer company. Shareholders holding not less than 90% of the face value of the equity shares of the transfer company other than the equity shares already held therein immediately before the amalgamation by the transferee company or the subsidiary or their nominees become equity shareholders of the transferee company by virtue of amalgamation. Third important aspect is the consideration of the amalgamation receivable by those equity shareholders of the transferor company who agree to become equity shareholders of the transferee company is discharged by the transferee company wholly by the issue of the equity shares in the transferee company, except that cash may be paid in respect of any fractional shares. Fourth, the business of the transferor company is intended to be carried on after the amalgamation by the transferee company. The fifth aspect is no adjustment is intended to be made to the book value of the assets and of the liabilities of the transferee company when they are incorporated in financial statements of the transferee company, except to ensure uniformity of accounting policies. Amalgamation, students, in the nature of purchase is an amalgamation which does not satisfy any or more of the conditions specified for an amalgamation in the nature of the merger. Consideration for the amalgamation means the aggregate of the shares and other securities issued and the payment made in the form of cash and other assets by the transferee company to the shareholders of the transferor company. Then we have something called a fair value. It is the amount for which an asset could be exchanged between knowledgeable willing buyer and a knowledgeable willing seller in an arm's length transaction. One more term which is commonly used is pooling of interest. It is a method of accounting for amalgamation, the object of which is to account for the amalgamation as if the separate businesses of the amalgamating company were intended to be continued by the transferee company. Accordingly, only minimal changes are made in aggregating the individual financial statements of the amalgamating company. Types of amalgamations. So, those amalgamations where there is a genuine pooling not merely of the assets and liabilities of the amalgamating companies, but also of the shareholders' interest and of the business of these companies or amalgamations which are in the nature of merger. The 5 conditions listed in the definition para are meant to assess this. The accounting treatment of such amalgamations should ensure that the resultant figures of assets, liabilities, capital and reserves more or less represent the sum of the relevant figures of the amalgamating companies. This is the pooling of interest method of accounting. Pooling of interest method of accounting. Under this method of accounting, the assets, liabilities and reserves of the transferor company are recorded by the transferee company at their existing carrying amount. However, if at the time of the amalgamation the transferor and the transferee companies have conflicting accounting policies, a uniform policies have to be set up and adopted by keeping following amalgamations. The effect of the financial statements of any changes in accounting policies are reported in accordance with accounting standard 5. We call it AS 5. Net profit or loss of the period. Prior period items and changes in accounting policies, purchase of the accounting methods. Under the purchase method, the transferee company accounts for the amalgamation either by incorporating the assets and liabilities at their existing carrying amount, or by allocating the consideration to individual identifiable assets and liabilities of the transfer company on the basis of their fair value at a date of amalgamation. Now, let us discuss about consideration. The consideration for the amalgamation may consist of securities, cash or other assets. In determining the value of the consideration, an assessment is made of the fair value of the elements. Students, reserves are also important. If the amalgamation is an amalgamation in the nature of merger, the identifier of the reserve is preserved and they appear in the financial statements of the transferee company in the same form in which they appeared in the financial statements of the transferor company. Therefore, reserves which are available for distribution as dividend before the amalgamation would be available for distribution as dividend after the amalgamation. Another aspect of the head balance sheet is goodwill. Goodwill arises on amalgamation, representing a payment made in anticipation of future income, and it is appropriate to treat it as an asset to be amortized to the income on a systematic basis over its useful life. Due to the nature of the goodwill, it is frequently difficult to estimate its useful life with reasonable certainty. Such estimations is therefore made on a prudent basis. It is considered appropriate to amortize goodwill over a period not exceeding 5 years unless a somewhat longer period can be justified. In estimating the useful life of goodwill arising on amalgamation, some of the factors to be considered are as follows. Number 1, the foreseeable life of the business or industry. Number 2, the effects of product obsolescence, changes in demand and other economic factors. Number 3, the service life expectancies of key individuals or group of employees. Number 4, expected actions by competitors or potential competitors and legal, regulatory or contractual provisions affecting the useful life. Now, profit and loss account balance. Now, in the case of an amalgamation in the nature of merger, the balance of profit and loss account appearing in the financial statements of a transfer company is aggregated with the corresponding balance appearing in the financial statements of the transferee company. Alternatively, it is transferred to the general reserves, if any are there. In the case of an amalgamation in the nature of purchase, the balance of the profit and loss account appearing in the financial statements of the transferor company, whether debit or credit, loses its identity. Now, there are disclosures. The following disclosures are considered appropriate in the first financial settlement following the amalgamation. Part A, names and general nature of business of the amalgamating companies. Part B, effective date of amalgamation for accounting purpose. Part C, the method of accounting used to reflect the amalgamation. Part D, particulars of the scheme sanctioned under a statute. Further, the following additional disclosures are considered appropriate in the first financial statements following the amalgamation in the case of pooling of interest. Part A, description and number of shares issued together with the percentage of each company's equity shares exchanged to the effect of the amalgamation. Part B, the amount of any difference between the consideration and the value of net identifiable assets acquired and the treatment thereof. Under the purchase method, the following additional disclosures are considered appropriate in the first financial statement following the amalgamation. Number 1 is consideration for the amalgamation and the description of the consideration paid or contingently payable. Next is the amount of any difference between the consideration and the value of net identifiable assets acquired and the treatment thereof, including the period of amortization of any goodwill arising on the amalgamation. Amalgamation after the balance sheet date. Now, when an amalgamation is effected after the balance sheet date, But before the issuance of the financial statements of either parties to the amalgamation, disclosure is made in accordance with the Accounting Standard 4. Contingencies and events occurring after the balance sheet date, but the amalgamation is not incorporated in the financial statements. That is all for today. I hope that you understood. So, we will meet in the next episode with a new topic. Till then, take care and goodbye.